Have you ever experienced burnout? I observe that in some churches and ministries, at least, burnout seems to be expected. It is a normal stage in the life cycle of a leader. We go from interests to enthusiasm to growth to busyness to burnout, and finally to a timeout. And then rinse and repeat. Burnout clearly is not fun. Is it something we all must experience? I reject the notion that it is a normal part of a ministry life cycle, but rather think burnout is a sign that something is wrong, and that the solution often involves at least a change in perspective, as we will see in this story. When I engaged in university student ministry, we had a phrase describing the experience of going on a Christian retreat weekend and feeling close to God. It was called a mountaintop high. Often our retreats were held in the coastal mountains in Northern California, so this was an accurate description in more ways than one. It was used to describe the perfectly normal feeling people get when they leave their books and tests behind for a few days to focus on God and His Word. Still, it also had the sense that as people come back down the mountain, they come back down from their high and re enter the stress and turmoil of their very privileged college life. So the mountaintop high often was short lived. We're looking in this chapter at the day after Elijah wins the great battle of the gods on Mount Carmel, calling down fire from heaven. After the victory, he kills all the enemy prophets of Baal, then prays and ends the 3-year drought. God had brought a drought on Israel due to Queen Jezebel's idolatry, but Elijah had been blamed for the drought because he first prophesied it. If you want to talk about a day of mountaintop high, Elijah's victory on Mount Carmel was that. What a day! One mystery of this chapter, then, is why, when Elijah returns to earth from his high, does he swing into such a severe depression that he wishes to die? Admittedly, this is an extreme case, but analyzing Elijah's story can perhaps give us a clue as to what is going on emotionally and spiritually when we experience burnout in ministry. I'll be reading from 1 Kings 19, verses 1 through 18. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and got up and fled for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under the solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. "It is enough now, O Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones, and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." He got up, and he ate and drank, and then went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, and saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand at the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. The Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance to the cave. Then there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." The Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram. You shall also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And you shall anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, of Abel Meholah, as prophet in your place. Whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall kill, and whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall kill. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." Elijah has just seen a great victory and God's vindication over the supporters of Baal. So why is he suffering from depression? I think God gave him a vision of what would happen on Mount Carmel, down to the 2 altars, the prayers of the priests of Baal. Elijah's mocking all those priests and the false god, and God's ultimate vindication. So Elijah was just reenacting the vision he had been given in his mind, in obedience, as he says in the prayer he prays just before the fire is sent down. But then Elijah latches on to another vision of his life after the Mount Carmel shutdown. I believe Elijah imagines that his life will get better and that the showdown complete and the drought lifted. Perhaps Elijah imagines that He would emerge from hiding from King Ahab and resume a normal life as a prophet who occasionally gives guidance and a word of warning or comfort to the political leaders of his country. It would have been reasonable for him to hope for this. I believe he came to expect it. He may even have hoped to enjoy something like respect or even acclaim. He was the true prophet who turned Israel back to Yahweh. It would not have been unreasonable for him to ponder this as a possible outcome, smiling as he imagined the honor that might have fallen on him as he humbly turned people's focus not to himself, but properly to God. With thoughts like this in his mind, again, perhaps I'm not claiming Jezebel's words telling him that she would hunt and kill him with vengeance and urgency. Well, they really walloped him. Objectively, if we had been there, we might have coached Elijah. Cheer up, Elijah. God is on your side. Clearly, how can you be afraid of Jezebel when things clearly aren't going her way? Don't let her idle threats get to you. Yes, had we been there, we might have been able to identify Elijah's fear of Jezebel in the face of the undeniable demonstration of God's power, and his vindication of Elijah is almost silly. But if Elijah had fixed his hope for a happy future on a specific outcome of the showdown, then when that outcome doesn't seem to materialize, it sends Elijah reeling. How does God deal with Elijah in his depression? Well, first of all, he doesn't say, there, Elijah, you need to take a break from your ministry. Ministry, or Elijah's faithful obedience to God's call, hasn't brought on this depression. Elijah's own dashed expectations, I believe, have led to his depression. Elijah fails to see things as God does, so God gives him new lenses by which he can see reality more clearly. Secondly, God corrects Elijah, but he is not impatient with Elijah. He loves Elijah. God demonstrates that Elijah is wrong. He is not alone in his worship of Yahweh, and God has his eyes on many who trust him. God patiently says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" God has directed his movements for several years, but this visit to Horeb was perhaps Elijah's idea. So God patiently listens as Elijah complains, twice using the same exact words, about his vacant life and his wish to die. God doesn't try to cheer up Elijah by telling him to take a well deserved break from all the complicated and perhaps unhealthy ministry. He doesn't sympathize when Elijah says he's the only faithful prophet left, which Elijah should know is not true. God comes to Elijah, but not in the way Elijah expects. God was not in the flashy things, wind, earthquake, fire, but in the slight sound of silence. Elijah recognizes God's presence, and God ministers to him and reclarifies his purpose. Elijah is not as good as dead. He has a reason to stay alive and to keep working. God says to Elijah, not there, but rather get back to work with a purpose, a partner, and a sense of my design power on your side. So I want to talk about idolatries on two mountains, how God gains victory over both idols. On Mount Carmel, with the people who worshiped the idol Baal, God gained a very public victory over this idolatry by raining down fire at the request of Elijah. Everyone that day knew that the Lord was God and Baal was not. Those who supported the massive effort to indoctrinate the people in the worship of Baal paid a steep price that day at Elijah's hand. And then 40 days later, on Mount Horeb with Elijah, who idolized the dramatic event, God gained a very private victory over Elijah's idolatry by coming not in wind, earthquake, or fire, but in a small sound of sheer silence. Elijah was being obedient in the Mount Carmel display, but he was trusting in the spectacle of God's power to save him, not in God himself. Elijah trusted a specific picture of salvation and hope, not in the God who backed that hope. On Mount Horeb that day, Elijah realized that God's power is more potent than any opposing force and can indeed be trusted, even when ministry doesn't work out the way he expects. God sees Elijah personally, not just as his role as a prophet to the people and king of Israel. So, what is God's message for us when we experience burnout or depression? First of all, we aren't alone. God is with us and has given us partners to help and encourage us. As God gave Elisha to Elijah as a partner, God can open our eyes to unknown, unlikely, or unnoticed partners for us as well. Secondly, reality is not as bleak as we think. God reminds us that we are not without His resources, help, and ultimate vindication. Our perception needs to change. We must see God larger and our problems smaller. And thirdly, God's work is sometimes small and quiet. Just because we haven't seen people healed does not mean we haven't seen the power of God or experienced His grace and healing touch in our own life. God calls us amid the quiet to rely on Him and press ahead with His purpose for our life, to love Him and love others. So, how are we tempted to trust in some specific picture of how God works rather than in God Himself? Well, we take evangelistic risks with our friends, sensing God's call. Yet they don't respond as we thought they would, so we get discouraged and doubt God's existence, power, or goodness. Or we take steps of faith to pray for healing for a friend based on a sense of promise from God. But in the short run, it seems that that promise isn't kept, or no dramatic results come. Or we sacrifice time and money for creative ministry outreach, expecting God to honor these sacrifices and vindicate our priorities. However, when we experience costs we didn't anticipate, relational tension, professional disappointment, or fail to see the results we were expecting, we can get discouraged and even burned out. Burnout is not a natural part of the ministry cycle and is always a sign of something being out of alignment. When we say yes to a call by God to pursue His ministry among His people with His resources and at His pace, ministry is meant to be renewing and restorative, and sustained motivation is possible over a lifetime. When we have attached our own expectations into God's call, we can get into trouble. Happily, as with Elijah, God is gentle with us and eager to help us find a way back to Him, to faith in Him, and to the gift of His calling for our life. Thank you for watching this video. This video is based on Sketches of Leadership number 18 and is available in written form with additional notes at the link in the description. Please, I encourage you to like and subscribe to my channel. You know that it really helps me get noticed and get the word out.